Hello and welcome to the next installment of Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Roosh, high school teacher, podcast host. And today we are going to be discussing the politicization, I don't know if I'm saying that even right, of the sciences, bringing politics into the sciences. And my guest is Colin Wright. Colin is an evolutionary biologist, and he has been at Penn State, and he has a story that I want to share and I want to get out to as many people as possible. So I invited him onto the show, and he's going to tell the story, and we're going to discuss the issues when we bring politics into the sciences. Colin, thank you for being here. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
So give us a little walkthrough about your story and what brings you into the culture wars, essentially. How did you, as a biologist, end up kind of on this side of this line in the sand? You're on the side of Heather Heying and Brett Weinstein and other evolutionary biologists, but also people like that I've had on the program, like James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, Alana Redstone, that are kind of pushing back against these politics in the hard sciences.
Yeah, so I never thought I'd really be getting into this area, I suppose. I kind of kept my head down for a while because the academia track is highly competitive. It's very much reputation based, as much as it is based on credentials. And so there's all these reasons why no academic really wants to rock the boat in any major way. They don't want to talk about controversial things. Because any blemish on your academic record, or not even just academic, but record in general, can just spell the difference between getting put in one stack of getting an interview and just maybe we'll pass on this person. So I'd previously, maybe before I went into grad school, so before like 2008, or sorry, around 2008, before, I was pretty outspoken in the sort of the atheist community, the online new atheism. And that was fine because it was mainly pushing back against things like creationism and intelligent design. But these are things that the academy, biologists are all on the same side on. So there's really no social repercussions to speaking out, really vociferously against things like creationism and intelligent design. And then that sort of faded down. And so I stopped talking about these sort of issues. And as I sort of went along through my undergrad and grad school, and then in my postdoc, I just sort of realized there was sort of this discussion going on that started with sort of denying sex differences, in personality or biological differences to some degree, and like strength. I heard more talk about we should be allowing trans women to compete in female sports. And this seemed really crazy to me. And then it wasn't until I really read some friends they were on Facebook, and they were saying that biological sex, not gender, but sex, was a social construct, or it's a spectrum, and there aren't any like classifications of male and female that are real in any sense. And then, so that was one thing. I thought it might have been just like a quarantine. I had a crazy group of friends on Facebook maybe, but then there was a few papers that came out in like the New York Times and in Nature that were making these same arguments about biological sex being a social construct or a spectrum. And so this is what blew me away, because now this is real life now. This isn't just social media. And these were topics that I think I at least knew a pretty decent amount on. I knew what biological sex was. And I felt like I needed to say something about that, but I really feel that my career might suffer as a consequence. And all my mentors at the time also really discouraged me from writing anything controversial on it, because it could be potentially, academic career suicide.
Can I just jump in there for a second?
Yeah, go for it.
Because this is really, really important, Colin. It really is. Yeah. So it started off just by friends of yours, people in your kind of science community saying this, or is this outsiders, celebrities, or just like random, high school buddies that are saying this kind of stuff?
So some of them were kind of high school buddies, but then the group specifically, like that particular high school buddy was in a PhD program for anthropology. He's a cultural anthropologist, and he had a bunch of anthropology grad student friends. So these are people that are getting their PhDs to a large degree. making these certain claims. That is what kind of raised a big red flag to me. Because I had seen those claims on Twitter and elsewhere before, and they had really bothered me, but I sort of thought they might be more like flat earthers, like you can just sort of ignore them because how could this idea possibly gain traction because it's so out there and bizarre. But then when I started hearing these people that I know to be very intelligent people making these arguments, it really just made it real for me.
Yeah.
So that's when, go ahead.
No, yeah, I mean, well, that's my question is like, and I want to get back to like the trajectory of how this went because it's important, but like, these are smart people that are saying this stuff. Do they, from your analysis, just like even early on, were you like, you don't really think this way? Like even like your, the people in like the administration or whatever, like, were you kind of like, come on, like you don't really think this, right? Like, or it's like where, I guess that's what is like, is it the line of, is it virtue signaling? Is it like, well, this is what we're supposed to think, or are they really buying into this?
Yes. So at first that wasn't clear to me, and I figured there must be some misunderstanding somewhere. Maybe we're using words slightly differently. It's because again, these are people in PhD programs and things like that. Sometimes actual professors as well. And so I would drill down a little bit on some of these conversations on social media, and it just became readily apparent that no, they're actually talking about biological sex, male and female, as biological categories themselves, and how they're a spectrum. You can only talk about, male typical types of bodies and female typical, but you can't really say that they're male or female because they always say that because intersex people exist, this 1 out of 5,000 individuals who are born with ambiguous genitalia, somehow the ambiguity of their sex sort of makes it so everyone's a little bit intersex, and everyone is a little bit ambiguous somewhere, which just isn't the case, and it's very clear. So it does appear that they do hold these actual beliefs. I don't know if that's everybody. Maybe some people are just sort of doing the virtue signal thing, or they just feel like they need to maintain sort of that argument because they feel like actual bigots out there might be using these other positions to justify their bigotry or something. Like if there are differences, then somehow discrimination is warranted or something. It seems to be a view a lot of people have.
I just don't understand it because if you go to the roots of where this stuff comes from, it's not these ideas were not created by scientists.
Yeah, not at all.
So why, like, no one should be listening to me while I'm talking about biology. Like, I shouldn't be telling you, listen, Colin, let me sit you down and tell you what really is real about biology. Like, who am I? Like that's what's so, it really baffles my mind. I'm almost like I'm too much of a simpleton for this to make sense. I don't get it.
Yeah, well, I mean, at first it was non-biologists, and as I said, it was when I started seeing these things pop up in Nature, and several different articles talk about how you can't use any combination of anatomy and genetics to determine someone's sex, which is just one of the most insane statements I could imagine, I could ever conceive a biologist saying. Because if it's not, has to do anything with anatomy and genetics, then like, well, what are we talking about when we're talking about organisms?
Okay, so let's get back into it. So you started, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep derailing you because this
no, go for it.
This is fascinating to me. Fascinating and terrifying. Just like the Boghossian hoax papers. It's like hilarious, fascinating, terrifying, so your journey's kind of already going down that path. So you started to see this stuff pop up, started talking to people about it, and then bring us back.
Yeah, so it was just really irking me, and I just couldn't, like, I worked, my research works with spiders and wasps, but the more I see that this fundamental aspect of biology is just being denied en masse, it suddenly became less interesting to me to study what I was studying. And I still did experiments and did publish research, but I felt like I needed to write something and speak out against this, because why am I going to teach people about the frontiers of behavioral science and genetics when a large proportion of my classroom might not even realize that male and female are like real categories? I felt like we need to kind of go back and just like, do I really need to be giving like these birds and bees talks to like these biology classes at school? Like, are we really back there to that point? And so yeah, so this kind of consumed me for a while, and I started writing a document, just kind of putting my thoughts on this piece of paper. I never thought I'd publish it. Maybe it was sort of just for myself. And then things were getting worse and worse. There was the grievance studies thing that came out, and I saw a lot more publications denying biological sex. And so I ended up sort of trimming my thoughts into an actual essay that was a kind of a capitulation of everything that I've been thinking of and venting about. And I ended up publishing that in Quillette, and the title of that was The New Evolution Deniers. Mm. And that really just sort of kicked everything off. It went really viral. They even did they had Greg Ellis come and narrate the piece, so you can hear a very nice British accent narrating the article. And so that's what kind of put me in the public, I guess, initially. And now then I sort of became known as like one of those people that are speaking out against this sort of wave of what I consider science denialism. And a lot of what I talked about in that piece was the fact that, you know, and I mentioned maybe a little bit earlier before we started recording, about how in the past there had been sort of attacks to science, but they came maybe more from the evangelical Christian side of things against evolution. And then so I talked about how we have a similar problem, but it's coming from sort of inside the institutions, inside the walls of academia. And they're not really denying evolution outright. They're just denying evolution from the you know, the neck up in some sense, with behavioral differences, and now apparently from the neck down as well, the whole thing with denying sex differences in general, which makes it even more difficult because, you know, people who are in the academy, like, we don't want to speak out against this stuff because others in the academy are there watching. They're able to police sort of who's saying what, and we have our reputations on the line if we say things that can be perceived as bigoted or something, even though we're just making, you know, strict biological arguments. So that was sort of the main thrust of that, and it was just going over the common arguments for why sex is a spectrum or a social construct, and just I tried to refute those as much as possible, and then highlight the problem of sort of this ideological policing going on within the academy.
Well, it's really difficult to argue against. I mean, I think Eric Weinstein was talking about the reason why he's even involved in these culture wars is it's taking so much energy and focus. If you're spending your days trying to convince people that there are male and female, then you're not really going off to do what's important to do, solving these problems. My 5-year-old just tied his shoes for the first time on his own yesterday. And now he can tie his shoes on his own. It's like, okay, now on to the next thing. You know, like we got that established now. And hopefully when he's 40 years old, we're not going to go back to be like, well, let's learn how to tie shoes. Like, and sciences have to build off of what we've established as being known and true. And now we're going backwards with all of this technology and everything like that. It's so damaging. And, you know, thank God for Quillette and Claire Lehman and that resource. And that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast is like giving a voice to you guys who are out there trying to just highlight how crazy this kind of is.
Yeah. So all along the way so after like the Quillette that article, I wrote another Quillette article with some other individuals. One was no one is born in the wrong body, sort of dealing with that claim that, you know, you can actually, there's like something, these male and female brains that are, you know, separate, that can be separated entirely from the body, and that you can actually have, you know, a male brain can just sprout a female body or something.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I had a Wall Street Journal article come out this February on Valentine's Day that sort of went over these similar things in my Quillette piece, but just talked about how, you know, how biological sex isn't a spectrum or a social construct, and how the denial of biological sex actually harms real groups of people, the groups that we should care about, like women, you know, the homosexuals, gays and lesbians, and then also children. And so, and all along, I've been getting signals from, you know, both colleagues in my field who've needed to distance themselves from my views, whether or not they agree with me. They can't publicly say things. I've had a really close friend, I won't say any names, who I've published papers with him before. We're co-authors on papers, and They sent me a text one morning that was just like, "Hey, Colin, I've been getting a lot of emails and contacts from people who are just asking me about our relationship together because we've been co-authors, and it's happened so much that I feel like I need to make a big tweet thread about you denouncing your views to the public." And it wasn't the fact that I had a friend that was gonna tweet something that disagreed with me. Like, that's totally fine. Like, I'm more than happy to someone say, "I disagree with you and here's why XYZ." But what bothered me was the fact that he felt pressured to do this by other colleagues who are sending him messages, sending him emails, maybe talking to him in meetings, and he felt pressured to avoid splash damage from me on his career. He felt that he needed to put this out there once and for all, which doesn't speak well for me, who's, I've said before, I'm taking. He's worried about splash damage, where I'm taking the full nozzle right to the face of this whole thing. And then Penn State diversity committees talking to my higher ups about how the students felt like my article attacked them, and they didn't feel safe on campus. So just all these things, people calling out on Twitter, tweeting at Penn State, is making it really difficult for me to see how I'd be in a position to get hired, especially when I've had certain chairs of departments and biology departments at private universities tell me that they were interested in my work. They liked my essays, they liked how I composed myself, and my research was good, but that if they were to try to offer me a job, they think HR would come in and block it at the last second. And so that just told me I need to abandon ship, because why am I going to invest so much time and effort doing more studies when I don't think it's actually going to translate into a job at the end of the day?
So I've tried to reach out to people who are in the hard sciences who support these ideas. Someone on Instagram, their tag is or their name is like Hood Biologist, I believe, and they're deep into social justice and equity and the non-binary ideas and stuff like that. I've had 3 different transgender people on my podcast and talked to them about it, and they are rooted in science, and they say, here, the science is here. This is the data. This is the studies, and blah, 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 blah. Now, we know what at least some of those studies actually look like because of the work that Peter, Helen, and James have done. But like, what would be the harm? By the way, they've all said no. They don't want to come on the podcast to discuss it, because I want to ask them the questions I'm asking you, which is like, why not sit down, you sit down, they sit down, and you compare and actually have a conversation about, which one is right. Now, the problem is, I think with that is because a lot of that side is rooted in postmodernism, that you're almost playing 2 different games.
Yeah.
Like, they're playing a game on, it feels this way, so it's true. And that's not the same game that the hard sciences are typically played. Is that an accurate way to break it down? Or
what are your... So I've made a comparison between sort of the postmodernist way, how those activists, how they kind of enter into a discussion in the way the creationist intelligent design people did.
It's back like a religion. Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
But there's an important distinction though too, because back when I was arguing against creationists and intelligent design proponents, what we could agree on at least was these basic observations of the way the world is as we see it. We wouldn't. The facts of the world are there. They just sort of the creationist intelligent design. They just sort of talk about they see the world as it is, but they kind of conjecture that there's some magical stuff going behind the scenes, and their explanation for how things got this way and how we are is sort of where we disagree. But they're usually somewhat evidence-based, and they're willing to argue, and they will concede points here and there. But when I argue with sort of these postmodern people, we can't even agree on the most basic observation. Like they don't even agree that shared facts exist. They think that facts themselves have to do with your power position,
tools of oppression, right?
Yeah, where if someone's coming from a place of less power, then their facts are all of a sudden, or what they say has more value to it, or has more relevance, or is somehow more true than if someone says it from another position of power. And that power dynamic is non-existent in the creationist intelligent design. They're willing to just argue facts. I don't think they're correct in how they're assessing these facts, but the other side, they don't even think they're shared facts. They can just, by mere stint of them having a higher oppression score or something, they're just more correct.
I've seen that too, because I've watched a lot of debates with like Sam Harris or Dawkins or something on one side, and then John Lennox or Rabbi, David Wolpe or something on the other. And it's like, these are high level intelligent conversations. There are a lot of people on that creationism side or some level of intelligent design that are really brilliant. I mean, John Lennox is a, mathematician at Oxford. I mean, these are people who can really articulate their points. And for someone like me, who's just always trying to be open-minded, I'm like, good point on this side, man. I don't know, those issues when it comes to, atheism or does God exist? I love those conversations, because if you get the good people on both sides, that's a tough one. But this is different. This isn't like, wow, great point. Wow, great point. This is a tough one. It's not a head scratcher. It's two different games.
Yeah. And one game is that they're playing, like I've watched a lot of Rabbi Wolpe talk to Sam Harris, and I just couldn't imagine any point along those conversations where Rabbi Wolpe would say something like, well, that's just because you're a white man or something, or any other trait. Like there's never a personal attack that goes there. Maybe with some people, I know like Reza Aslan is pretty, much into that social justice postmodern way of engaging, where it's just, when you don't have the arguments, you just start attacking them for who they are. And you kind of use that as this moralistic, just damage their character, and somehow you won the argument, whereas you don't get that from the other actual traditional religious.
It's really upsetting. I did a project in my civics class, which is, I don't think I'd be able to do it at any other school other than the amazing school that I'm at right now. I'm at this very unique situation educationally, where I had my students compare letters from a Birmingham jail, the letters that Martin Luther King wrote, to Mike Naina's documentary that he did on Brett Weinstein when he was ousted from Evergreen. And there are a lot of comparisons to that. And when you say that there are people who are speaking out against you because they're being pressured to, even though they don't believe it, there's a similarity there to what Martin Luther King was talking about. Is it's not the racists that are going to be the ones who are really causing damage. It's the good people who know that they're wrong, that those racists are wrong, but just keep their mouths shut. And that seems like what a lot of this is there's good people, smart people who know that this is, for lack of a better term, bullshit. And yet they're keeping their mouth shut, and it's cowardice because they're scared of being labeled the worst things you could be labeled: sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic, whatever. So they keep their mouth shut. And it seems like there is, and I'm not trying to say it's just to insult people. It's the way I'm kind of calling it, the way I see it. It seems like a lot of cowardice of people scared to step up and do what they know to be true and right. Is that something that is fair to say? Is that like what it seems like to you? I mean,
and it's important to realize too how different sort of academia is from some other type of jobs too. Just because you have to in order to get a job, if you're going on if you want to get a tenure track professor job, that's what I was looking to get. The amount of time that you need to put in before to get to that point is immense. You need to go to college, you get a 4-year degree in science, you need to go to grad school, where you're going to be there for 5 to 6 years before you can to graduate to get your PhD. You need to do anywhere between 2 to 4 more years as a postdoc, because they want to see that you've been successful outside the lab that you got your PhD in, just make sure that there wasn't just like a laboratory effect, that you're productive in multiple environments. And then you might get an assistant professor job. But even when you get the assistant professor job, you have 5 or 6 years before you go up for tenure. And so at this point, we're looking at 20 or more years before you actually have a job that you feel any degree of security in. At any point along those, they can just not renew your contract. And then to get another job in academia, you just go to apply to everything. And the chances you're going to get a job, that year could be, extremely bad. It's not like I'll just go here and apply to this place. You can't apply to certain universities. And so there's all these things that are keeping people to put their heads down and not get any blemishes on their academic record or their social record, just because it's so competitive. Any blemish is just, going to land your application in the other pile rather than this one. And so there's these special forces that are keeping academics down. And then whenever someone does decide to poke their heads up, like I did, like Dr. Emma Hilton does, who I've worked with, or Heather or Brett, they just get attacked big time. It's there's this one job board in my field. It's the biggest job board for evolutionary biologists and ecologists. It's called the Evo Jobs Wiki. It's basically just a Google spreadsheet. Anyone can post job listings on there, and hundreds, if not thousands, of biologists are on this every day looking for jobs and posting jobs. And as soon as I published my new evolution deniers piece, shortly after, I'm thick in the job market applying to stuff, somebody posts a job, and the description of the job is Colin Wright is a transphobe and race scientist, and supports race science. And then it had, he's at Penn State, he's this, and it's just sitting there for hundreds to thousands of people to see in the height of job season where everyone's on this. And then it happened again just a month ago after I published my Wall Street Journal article. They're doing this again. And so you see that they're just anyone who's going to speak out, and I'm not even saying controversial things biologically. I think I'm saying the most boilerplate foundational things, that male and female are real categories, intersex individuals are real. Maybe some of these individuals might not have a determinable sex because they have certain developmental complications where they can't be categorized, but male and female, they're still real. They're not relational. You're not like 70% male if you're on the male side. Like you and me, we don't stand in this relational thing where like one of us is more male than the other. If one of us is taller or one of us has a thicker beard, that's we're all equally male if you're male. We're all equally female if you're female. The fact that some individuals might be hard to classify in the middle doesn't mean everyone else is hard to classify. Like that's just not the case.
Well, yeah, and those can hold the same ground. You can say like someone is they have more testosterone than other people. Jocko Willink is just more of a man than me. Sure, but that's not really what's up for. That's not what's going on here. And Colin, you know what? Maybe you're wrong. Maybe they are right. So why don't we just sit down and have this conversation together? Yeah. They won't do it. They won't come and talk to you. Like I have reached out. The reason why I've had the people that I have is because they're the ones who will come on here. And I've had some people from that side, but as soon as I start asking them questions, they don't engage with that. They will not engage in these conversations. This feels like McCarthyism. And we've seen this before. And that's why comparing Martin Luther King letters from Birmingham jail to Brett Weinstein is so interesting, is because, well, this is so different. This one's about racists and this one's about anti-racists. So you can't make that comparison. It's like, this is so aligned. It's the same. This is McCarthyism, getting people to rat you out, going after you, trying to blacklist you. This is happening right now. It's I don't know. It's very startling, and I think a lot of people don't think it's really happening. I think that your story, they would say, either people like haven't heard your story, which is why I'm giving it here, or they would say, well, that's a fluke. That's not happening all over the place.
Well, I mean, they can run the experiment themselves if they just go on Twitter and start tweeting about, female or real categories. And, if they actually think that's a true statement, why would they feel maybe any reservation of, just tweet that out a couple times a day, see how it goes for them. I guarantee they're going to get a lot of hate, and they might feel hesitant to say that again in the future.
Would you be interested in having, have you had a debate with like a woke biologist about the concept before?
I've had sort of Twitter back and forth with people. I'd be up for talking to somebody in person. In a way, that'd be way better because on Twitter, it's easy just to
Yeah, right.
sort of
There's humanity
twist
there.
a word here and there or misinterpret something, and then you're
For
talking
sure.
past each other. When me and Emma wrote our Wall Street Journal article, we hoped that would be sort of launching a dialogue and that we'd get a response or something. But a couple months later, there's no response has emerged. There's been some people maybe writing on Medium, but it usually goes the same way. They'll take our argument about biological sex, they'll mention the word gender, which is separate from sex, and then they'll talk about how gender isn't binary, and then from there they're just not even addressing our arguments anymore. They switch to gender, and then they act like they're actually talking about the same thing when it's.
Well, I would love to. I mean, I like Peter Boghossian's book, the How to Have Impossible Conversations, because part of that is like you would have to recognize their side. Like, so are you saying this? Is this your argument? And then they would say yes or no. And then they would have to say, is this your argument? Like there would have to be some sort of formal way to just clarify, is this what you're saying? And then we can move forward. But the problem is, I don't think that they will sit down with you and talk. And I've had the conversation with people before on some of these controversial issues, and they go, well, how do you know you're right? I said, I don't know that I'm right with when it comes to a lot of this stuff, but I know that I'm on the side of right because I'm willing to talk about it. I will have a conversation with anyone about anything. And so that gives me some level, in my head anyway, of being on the quote unquote right side of this issue. Because at least I'll talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's all I really ask of people at the end of the day. I don't need to agree with them. If someone wants to argue that sex is a spectrum, and they can believe that. I'm not going to think they're a bad person for believing that, as long as they can actually give a coherent argument or tell me exactly where along my argument is. Where's the fork in the road? Where are we diverging from what we're saying?
Yeah.
And they just don't seem to want to do that.
Is this just around sex and gender and stuff like that, or does this also play a role when it comes to like racial issues? Not just like transgender issues, but like male and female differences, as far as like not having anything to do with the trans issue at all. Like if we just take the trans issue off the table, like where have you seen it come up in other ways?
It comes up in any basically psychological differences between males and females as well. So any personality differences, any difference in preference, toy choice, anything like this. Any type of psychological difference, they're gonna want to say it's basically all environmental, and that this is not an innate property of males and females. And they'll cite an example of like, well, here's a female who's extremely masculine in her tastes, and it's like, well, okay, well, these single outliers don't negate the average trends between groups. I mean, we have these, if you think about it, into like overlapping, distributions of bell curves. Like you can still have an average difference between populations, and there can still be a lot of overlap. So you can still have, a female who's going to be more masculine than most males on the tail end, and some male who's going to be more feminine than most females on some traits. So that's a hot button thing that people don't tend to want to get into. Another huge thing is any intelligence research, IQ stuff. We saw researcher Noah Carl in the UK. He got basically fired from his postdoc for talking about that stuff.
It's like Charles Murray stuff, like.
Yeah, similar. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with Noah Carl's research. I just know that there was a huge petition to get him fired by people who weren't even in the field and who clearly never read his research, and someone said it's race science, and they just got rid of him. People like Bo Weingard, who talk about human population differences and psychological traits. If you want to talk about there's this claim that race is a social construct too, that you hear a lot. So if anyone who's arguing against these claims that there's no clustering of biological traits in certain regions, certain populations around the world that are there due to environmental differences and in adaptations to local areas or something like that. You can't touch those topics either. Those are just there's just landmines everywhere you turn.
Well, I'm touching them.
Yeah. I talk mainly just about biological sex. I do criticize gender ideology because I think that's sort of the fuel that's driving these narratives of trying to demolish the binaries of sex. I stay away from the other ones just because population genetics isn't my thing. I'd be more likely to actually get egg on my face or something if something I said. I'm not too familiar with those positions. But I know others who speak really articulately on those, and they make more sense to me. But I kind of just, my hobby horse is the sex differences, because to me those other arguments, they're a little more nuanced. To get like intelligence, like what's IQ measuring, what are we calling race, what are we, it's a complex argument that's being made. But I've referred to sort of the defending biological sex as a real category. I've referred to it as being sort of reality's last stand, in my view. This is just, if we can't agree that these are real things, that anyone can just see, this is a male, this person's a female because they have, penis and testes or vagina and ovaries. Like, we can't even agree on that, then everything is just chaos. Like, we can't do anything. We don't have any traction to make any moves anywhere anymore if we can't get this one right. So.
And we can change definitions of words. If you want to change like the term, like the definition, the dictionary definition of like racist is, the belief that a specific race is inferior or superior to another, but then that got changed to, prejudice plus power or something. Like, let's just pick a new word then. Like, if you want to change the gender and you want it to be like male and female, but you want to say, well, what do you call someone who is, blah, 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 blah. Like, well, let's change it to something else. We have to recognize the difference, because if you just a hypothetical would be, if you were born, female and then transition to male, and then you change your birth certificate, you don't reveal it to your doctor or anything like that, and you have abdominal pain, like that might be something really different. And why can't we recognize it? I had Corinna Cohn on the podcast, and she's awesome. And she was saying, like, she even said something along the lines of like, I'm not a biological female, I'm a trans female. It's like, why is that? That should not be a bad thing. That should be that's part of who you are. And that could be a wonderful thing. And why are we playing this game that doesn't make a lot of sense, where it doesn't make any sense, when we can just like expand our vocabulary, expand our thinking, include everyone. We're trying to include everyone in society. Like, we can still do that, but we can say that there is a difference between, the same way we could probably say there's a difference between me and, whatever, Dwayne Johnson, as far as our testosterone we have and size and muscle mass and stuff. That's fine, but we shouldn't say that we are two different species. Like, that would not fit. Does that make sense what I'm saying? It's like a little dumbed down.
I think it's just more expedient to their activism, where they could try to convince people based on arguments, but it's much easier to just change the words that we use.
Plow it over.
And a lot of laws that we have that give women, women's rights movements and Title IX stuff that refers to gender. Well, in all these old laws, gender was interpreted to mean biological sex, what we talk about today. It never meant to be referred to as someone's internal identity of how they feel about themselves in relation to certain traits that they have. But if they can change the words man and woman now to not being sex terms, but being referring to identity, then they don't have to change any laws. They can just change the words that we use. And now these laws apply to entirely different things now. And they didn't have to do anything else besides just change how we speak about things. Now, the WNBA, the Women's National Basketball Association, and now they'll look at that and say, well, if trans women are women based on identity, then why couldn't they play in the WNBA? And what they don't ever do is actually engage on the same conceptual grounds. Like, I don't care about what words we're using. At the end of the day,
right,
you use whatever word. If you want to use your own definition, that's fine. I just want to we need to connect on the concepts that these words are trying to explain. And it's clear that we have women's leagues and men's leagues, not based on identity, but because of real biological sex differences between these. Like, if LeBron James identified as a woman, that would not make sense for him to play over there, because identity plays no role. It would be like having separate leagues for Democrats and Republicans. Like there's nothing inherently about the state of someone's mind as a Democrat or Republican that's going to make them a better basketball player or run faster. These are arbitrary characteristics. But what isn't arbitrary is biological sex, and that's clearly why it was done.
And we know that because, I mean, Dave Chappelle did a whole bit on it. Like LeBron James and the WNBA, it's like, that's at the core of it, is like, why are we even, I feel like this is a waste of our time, Colin. Like, what are we talking about? Clearly, this is true. Clearly. And everyone knows it. Everyone. And the only people that don't are the ones who have chosen ignorance. And it's that's why I think it's a good comparison to religion. I'm glad that you highlighted like the differences that you see, and I think they're valid, but this is so obvious. Where, I guess to close this out, like for people who maybe don't think that this is that big of a deal, or it'll just kind of blow over, or it's just like phases, there's ups and downs, or it's not, this is something that we'll look back on and go, oh yeah, that was kind of a silly little phase. It didn't really have any long-term repercussions or anything. Where do you think, if this isn't put in the check, if this isn't having yourself and having, some sort of platform for, that like Brett and Heather are doing, or that James and Helen are doing with new discourses and all that kind of stuff, where will this lead if this isn't kind of met with some resistance or put an end to? Like, let's play this movie to the end.
Yeah.
Okay? So all of the universities are taken over with this, all of the hard sciences are taken over like this. Where is this going if it's not halted?
Yeah, it's going to erode the university system, and then rightfully, if that's the case, public trust in experts. Like, what's going to be expert opinion in a future where there is no objective truth and everything is just based on these sort of power dynamics? We're going to see, it's hard to see how it might affect some of like the more harder science, like the physics and mathematics, although you do see some there's a social justice textbook for math out now.
Oh yeah, the Seattle math standards.
Yeah, and you do see some physicists trying to who don't actually do, or they might do some physics, but they're trying to get degrees doing sort of critical physics studies type thing, and looking at how narratives about light have influenced narratives in the way we think about things. And these are it's just insane. I think it needs to be reversed. It's really difficult to do it, I think, at this point, because we kind of have a snowball effect. It's sort of a positive feedback loop. I think social media has sort of made it so you can, it's more easy for departments to sort of self-select individuals that are more like-minded than them. Because before, we'd have interviews with people before the internet, say, you go to an interview and there's certain interview questions you're not allowed to ask people. You can't ask, are you about to have a baby? Because, we don't want your productivity to go down if you have a baby. Right. You don't want to ask, who did you vote for? Because we realize these aren't questions that should matter either morally or just they're irrelevant to being a good like microbiologist or something. And so while we still don't ask those questions during interviews today, because we still realize that, the same reasons, like these are irrelevant, we don't have any problem doing a big Google search then and going on their social media and trying to stalk them and gain the same information that would have been unethical to say to their face. Now it's all of a sudden seems okay to do through any other means that you would like to. And we can gather so much more info about people before we make a hiring decision that should be irrelevant to the hiring decision. That I think the skew was already left, and it's just going to be going more and more left. And when you have people that are all, when you have this ideological monoculture, they're all going to share the same blind spot. And then so when people like me and Pluckrose, James Lindsay, Boghossian, Heather Hine, Weinstein, we're all going to point to this blind spot. And because they all share the blind spot, they can't see it. They just don't see us pointing to it. Have you ever done the blind spot thing where you have like the pencil, the eraser, and it disappears when you hold it over there? So we're pointing at this eraser, and then since they all have the same blind spot, they're saying like, what eraser? I don't see what you're talking about. And that's just the feedback loop. And so, yeah, I just see it as just, unless you can implement some way of maybe anonymizing applications for professor positions, where you remove the author names from papers and just share, here's the journal these were published in, you don't know who this person is. Like, that's not the most ideal, but it's certainly more ideal than sort of gathering as much dirt on people as you can before you hire them, just to see if maybe you're going to have a, some sort of legal liability on your hands or something.
That would only happen, like these changes in the university system will only happen within the university. It's like changing Congress.
We have to rely on professors and the administrators are even more skewed radical than the professors are.
Yeah. Oh man.
So I wish I could be optimistic, but I really don't see it getting better anytime soon.
It'll get worse before it gets better.
Maybe some competing universities need to pop up. I know Hillsdale's doing well. They actually have their mission statement is very anti-social justice. It's very individual, merit matters.
University of Chicago, I think, too, is doing a decent job. From last time.
They have at least a good mission statement, for sure, in defense of free speech. So I just think there's going to be a market for colleges that are going to be doing that. So maybe we can rely on some sort of market mechanism where maybe private colleges are ones that are taking a separate stance with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Just sort of different philosophical values of what we think a university should value in the search for truth.
Yeah.
Viewpoint diversity rather than superficial, melanin diversity. I think there will be a demand for things like that. So that could potentially be a saving grace if we can have some competition, I guess, in that sphere.
Yeah, the quote that keeps coming up is, ironically, when Jesus is on the cross and he says, "Forgive them, they don't know what they're doing," and that just keeps coming up. Because I follow a lot of social justice, advocates and activists and stuff. Because I don't want blind spots I don't want to represent their arguments wrong. I want to try and steelman their points of view, but I keep thinking that, like, wow, like, it sounds very patronizing. And I'm not trying to be patronizing. It's just, it's the way I see it is like, you don't understand what you're doing. You have good intentions. I think a lot of them at least have good intentions, especially people that are going along with it when they're like, okay, well, this is the right thing to do. You have no idea what you're doing. And that sounds like, oh, like I know, like I'm some expert. I'm not, but I'm enough of a rube that I can see through this. I was just like, this is way, way more simple than than it looks. This is not that complicated.
I think a lot of it's somewhat just being naive too, because most professors, they're busy doing, they're studying fruit flies, they're studying, cellular behavior or whatever they're doing. And they just sort of they see, they hear social justice and they're like, yeah, social justice, like, say that, like LGBT, like I'm good with that. Like they're progressive and all the right reasons. And I just don't think they realize what the modern social justice, the critical theory that's sort of has infected the social justice movement. It used to be the civil rights movement,
right?
And now it's sort of morphed into something that's truly grotesque, and it's only social justice in name only. And so you get a lot of professors that just nominally, sign their name on the petitions or whatever, and they don't want to question this group because they've been oppressed in the past, and they've done good things in the past, and they just sort of give it support and don't think about it that much during the day. But they're the ones that are just making it hard for everyone else. Their failure to engage in what they're actually saying is making the environment just really dangerous for anyone who's trying to speak up, who's trying to do their best, like I am.
Yeah. So on that note, where can people find you, support what you're doing, read what you're doing, social media, all of that kind of stuff? Because I'm trying to use this as a platform for you, Colin. I want people to go listen to you, hear your point of view, engage with you. And you know what? If you're listening to this and you go, Colin is wrong, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he needs to become woke, then engage. And you know what? Come right on Cylinder Radio. We'll have a great, fair debate. And you can't look back, this is my little pitch, you can't look back at the 55 people that I've had on, which are a wide, diverse group. I have had many social justice advocates on. I have had many people all across the intersectionality matrix on this program. And every single one of them has, at least to my face, said that I've given them a fair shake and a good representation for their perspectives and their views. So I would love to try and get something going where we can try and see where are we missing each other, and can we find some common ground to move forward with something a little bit better. Where can people see what you're up to, follow what you're doing, and things like that, Colin?
So the main place, you can follow me on Twitter and with the handle Swipe Right, with my last name WRAGHT. Since I'm no longer in academia, I'm sort of doing a reset right now, where I'm probably going to be launching a YouTube channel pretty soon to sort of do kind of what you're doing, interviewing people just to pick their brains and sort of try to make sense of everything that's going on and ways forward. I'll be writing a lot too, so I'll be probably submitting more stuff to Colette in the future. I have a Patreon and GoFundMe set up just as I do the transition from academia to whatever else I'm going to be starting to do. So for now, Twitter, that's when you can pretty much get my daily updates and what I'm thinking about.
That's awesome. I was listening to Eric Weinstein on the Lex Friedman, AI show, and Eric was talking about how he decamped from academia to the internet because that's where the best ideas seem to be going. And that's so weird.
Yeah.
They're leaving the best universities for the internet, where there's also crazy stuff. But I think that's a great move for you, Colin, and I'll support that in any way that I can.
I think so too. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right, man. All right. Take care and stay the course.
I will.
All right. Bye.